Welcome. It's my pleasure to say a few words by introduction to our invited speaker, who will give a about 30 minutes talk. Gemma Galdón-Clavell. She studied at Barcelona Universidad Autónoma, and just by looking at her career, her university career, I must say this is only part of your career. One can already see that she has absorbed a wide range of topics and disciplines like technology, policy. I think it would be quite correct to say that part of what you are is a technology analyst, and also urban and security policy issues, which is a vector that brings you to up-to-date topics like smart cities, I suppose. And through all this, she came to specialize in what could be summarized as algorithmic accountability. I think this is a main driving intellectual thing that you're up to now. She continues to be a senior advisor to the European Commission. She even was featured in Forbes magazine. And I mean, Forbes magazine signals a really high visibility. And why that? Because she is also an innovative entrepreneur. And in this quality, she founded, and she is the CEO of a consultancy agency called POETICS. And the slogan or the motto is Better AI. Now, given that she's going to talk to us about that we should not take AI too seriously, I really wonder how this how this goes together with better AI. Accountability conceptually is close to responsibility, and considering responsibility, which could be rendered, I mean, this is a slight pun, but it has something in it, as the ability to respond, and the practices in which we cultivate the ability to respond. A modern form of these practices is, of course, audits, and this is the second center of gravity that I think you're working on, namely how could we improve practices of auditing in the world of artificial intelligence. And now, just to mention one influential paper which came out in 2021, make algorithmic audits as ubiquitous as seatbelts. And I think this is a clear pronouncement. And with this, without further ado, I invite you to the microphone, and I'm really looking forward to your lecture.
Thank you so much, Matthias. Thank you. Thanks for staying. It's very late. Allow me to keep my coat on. One of the consequences of jet lag and tiredness is that your body doesn't regulate temperature very well, so I'm cold. And I hope that's fine. Thanks for the effort trying to summarize my work. I wouldn't know how to describe my my career or my life. I have a vague idea of how I got here, but my past or my background, the most relevant, significant background is in the no global movement as an activist in the turn of the century, trying to understand the new world that was coming before us. Part of it due to the generalization of the use of the internet, trying to understand what that meant for society, and trying to understand how these technologies impacted on people and how we could protect people impacted by those technologies. As an activist or someone with strong opinions about things, I grew quite frustrated with what I was seeing. I grew frustrated with policymakers who didn't seem to understand the challenges that were at stake. Thank you so much. With these new technologies, I grew frustrated with the tech industry that refused to listen and to protect people and to understand that every innovation is made better by seatbelts, by protections. But also quite frustrated with artists. In my environment, the underground squatter environment, playing with new media possibilities in the first 10 years of the century, I saw a lot of celebration of technology and a lot of a critical celebration of technology. And it didn't sit right with me because I was beginning to look into surveillance issues and the role of data in controlling us. And I felt that oftentimes the art that we were making was too enamored or seduced by those solutions and not able to take the critical distance that we needed to kind of point to the things that nobody else was pointing. So oftentimes I saw artistic solutions that kind of defended surveillance as long as we were the ones doing the surveillance. So which again was very, very problematic. And so looking at that and seeing how a lot of people were failing to do their job properly, I was like, how can I be useful in this space? And so I try to focus on understanding technology, and so getting a better understanding of what this data world was about. And that has turned over time in me leaving academia. I'm a very much recovered academic, and now kind of start my own art project in a way. Like Ethicas is my way of finding a space for my work and my way of making a difference. And I follow whatever doors Ethicas opens. So for a long time, Ethicas was a nonprofit. Then we started doing consultancy services. Then I moved to the US and we got some investment funding. So now we're a startup with VC backing. So always trying to kind of hijack established ways of doing things. And in my case, putting technology at the center. And for the last few years, I've been focusing very much on the possibilities of auditing as one of the ways to start undoing the harms of AI. I think that before we can start correcting those harms, we need to understand them, we need to quantify them. And auditing, algorithmic auditing, is a way of inspecting those systems that allow us to look at those harms, quantify them, work with the communities that are impacted by those systems, but also work with developers and turn those harms into technical specifications so that those systems work better. And that's where the better AI comes from. Cars are better because they have seatbelts. AI is better if it incorporates mechanisms to mitigate harms. And we can get into whether AI is the solution, and I'm going to get to into that in a minute. So that's what I do today, together with my team. We continue to be a nonprofit with a for-profit arm that works with the industry to do these audits and build solutions to incorporate harms into technical specifications. One of the things that has happened because of the corporate takeover of technology, and because of the specificities of debating highly technical issues, is that oftentimes the debate that we have as a society, but also policymakers, discusses science fiction, not technology. And that makes it really hard to intervene from an expert perspective, because you are trying to talk about data and data processes, and then you're hit with consciousness, or the future of life, or robots, and that's just not useful. That's not what we see when we inspect those systems, and I'll go into that. I think that the fact that the technology industry is so driven by marketing claims and by the need to raise capital, not so much to sell good products, but to raise capital, means that the whole debate is around the promises of what this could be, and making that promise really big, because if you don't make it big, no one's going to give you millions for you to build your solution. So my role here is to help you cut through that science fiction, demystify AI, and understand really what those data processes are, what they mean, and what they can and cannot do. So the first thing maybe to kind of clarify about AI is that artificial intelligence is artificial, but it's not intelligent. We tend to anthropomorphize everything related to AI, and again, that is very problematic, and it's part of a marketing campaign more than an effort to describe these systems. So we were talking about hallucination before, that's exactly the same thing. We ascribe human phenomena and human dynamics to technical systems that what they do is completely different to what a human would do when they hallucinate, and you were making that very clear in the debate that we just had. But there's so many examples of the difference between how these systems work and how humans work. An example that I always use because I think it's very graphic. If we take a 4-month-old child and show them one cat, one day, that human being will be able to identify any cat in any position of any age and any color for the rest of their lives. That's how our brains work. We can capture images and abstract on those. If we want an AI system to identify a cat, we need to train it millions of images of cats, and we'll still have a problem with an AI that identifies lions as cats. Because the way of processing and understanding that information is completely different. So there's nothing intelligent about training a system and asking it to identify patterns, reproduce those patterns, and then recreate something that looks like the identification of an image. The process behind it is completely different. So we can, calling both things intelligence is not helpful, and positions that is in this kind of space of science fiction. I also find that the marketing claims around technology tend to play on, first on our hopes. I think we all want to be saved. We all want something to save all problems and to make it easy. And so it's good to hear AI will make the world a better place. Just like smart cities were supposed to make the world a better place, just like so many solutions were supposed to make things better. I think that those marketing claims play on our need for things to get better, but also prey on some of our faulty logic sometimes. The best way of exemplifying this is if I tell you that human beings can walk and therefore they can run, you understand that there's a relationship between walking and running, right? I mean, the parts of your body that are involved in both exercises are quite similar. So it's quite logic that someone or any mammal that can walk can also run. If I tell you, yes, but the next iteration of mammals is going to be to fly. You walk, you run, you fly. Why not? You immediately know that that's not going to happen. Because you know that what you need in order to fly is very different from what you need to walk and to run. With AI, we don't have that knowledge. And so we are being told we have machines that walk, sometimes run. The next iteration is consciousness. It's going to naturally evolve into that. When there's a huge break between the data systems that we see right now and the mathematical functions that we inspect when we audit the systems, and what it takes for an entity to develop the ability to have a consciousness, or to go from understanding a cat as a series of millions of images and pixels into seeing a cat when you're 4 months old and never forgetting that. So there's a serious logical gap that, because we don't know enough, we can't pinpoint. We know enough about walking and running and flying to understand that there's no sequence. We don't know enough about data to understand that there's no sequence between big data, artificial intelligence, and general artificial intelligence. There's a leap of faith there that makes no sense to anyone that works with these systems in real life. But it's also important to remember that we don't have these dreams, and we are not easy to fool because we are so close. We have these dreams and we are easy to fool because we are humans. And humans before us have been fooled by technical artifacts many, many times over. One of the great ironies of the current era is that Amazon Mechanical Turk, do you know what Amazon Mechanical Turk is? Mechanical Turk is a product of Amazon that allows you to hire people for very little money to do tasks that are that require enough of a human that a human needs to be involved, but they're easy enough that anyone can do it. So actually, you can hire children in India to look at video. So for instance, you just want to get views on a video, so you just hire people to just look at the video. You just need to play and then watch it, and I just have more views, for instance. Or you need to rank something or answer a question. So things that if they were automated, the systems would identify it, but if it's done by humans, then the system thinks that there's a human behind it and that those views are real views. The interesting thing is the name, Mechanical Turk. The Turk, El Turco, was an intelligent machine in the 17th century that claimed to be able to win at chess. In the 17th century, you can Google this, there was a robot that would sit in front of a chess game. Someone would sit in front of the robot, play, and the robot would win. It got really popular. Every royal family in Europe wanted to see it. It toured the whole continent. It was Austrian originally. Over time, after the whole world had been seduced about, oh my God, we have robots that can win at chess. Like, we didn't have a Turing test back then, but like, they're becoming sentient. Over time, it was discovered that the maker of El Turco was actually hiding underneath the table. It was magic. But it took a long time for that to be discovered. And what is interesting is how people were willing to believe. Every single human society has played with the idea of the artificial reproduction of intelligence. Every society before us has failed. And I have no reason to believe, with the data and the systems that I inspect today, that we are anywhere closer than they were in the 17th century with El Turco. And I think it's really interesting that Amazon Mechanical Turk got the name from that. And oftentimes, a lot of the systems that are sold to us as automated actually have little people underneath the table doing the content moderation or the video viewing or the calling the restaurant to book a table. So there's a lot of human labor hidden behind those systems. So again, AI is artificial, is not intelligent. The way that all AIs work in the same way. They capture historical data, so you need to have a good amount, and ideally a massive amount of historical data. The AI is trained to identify patterns, that is, things that happen a lot of times in that training data, attributes that are repeated very often, and then produce an outcome based on those patterns. And the idea is to maximize the most common patterns. A good example is a GPS. We all use GPS to go from A to B. We use our phone. When you ask your GPS, I took a taxi to come here this morning. When I said, how do I get from here to there? There's no human being, there's no turco hiding underneath my phone, looking out the window, how is the driving today? It's basically past data on how people have moved between Dortmund and Witten, processing of all that data and identifying the main patterns. So most people, when they come at this time from Dortmund to Witten, follow this route. So the system understands, because most people did that, because that's the majority pattern, that is the most efficient pattern. And that's what I get as a recommendation, that's the output. So it recommends that I do that. And if anyone takes another route, the system understands that those are outliers. These are people that took other routes and it took them longer. These are not efficient routes. So AI systems, when they see outliers, they see them as noise. And so the role of an AI system is to identify outliers and kick them out and maximize the repetition of the most optimal, the most efficient solution, which is the majority solution. And then that process is shared between artificial intelligence and big data. What happens with artificial intelligence is that oftentimes what we have is that the output becomes the input. So the route that I took this morning feeds the algorithm, and so more people are going to end up doing that route because I'm confirming to the algorithm that that is the most efficient route. And that machine learning can be supervised or unsupervised. In the case of GPS, it is unsupervised. In medical cases, for instance, there's often supervision, so you don't want to feed things that may not make sense. But it's that kind of loop that we call artificial intelligence formally. So formally, if there's no machine learning, it's not artificial intelligence. In the regulation, the understanding is broader, and so big data systems are also considered artificial intelligence. So it's a bit of a mess, but just for you to know where the term comes from, artificial intelligence is a marketing term for machine learning. But oftentimes when we discuss these systems, we also take into account the systems that don't have machine learning, supervised or unsupervised, where you just have an input, an algorithm, and an output that helps you make a decision. So that's how systems work. And what happened with the incorporation of machine learning is that what the industry tells us is, because I can capture massive amounts of data, because now we have all that data, because we all carry our phones, we produce data all the time, so there's a lot of data on everything. I can capture all this data, I can have all these algorithms to understand what those patterns are. I can come up with an output, and the output can go back inside the system. Then in big data, the expert was still a key figure. So when we built scripts or data programs in the big data era 5 years ago, the expert was key. So as an expert, I worked in security for a long time. We would make the decisions. We would curate the data, we would organize the data, we would ask questions to the data, and the data would respond, and we would assess whether the response was useful or not. What artificial intelligence tells us is, data is so powerful and so right that we don't need the expert anymore. There's an example that I think makes it very clear. In the past, if I wanted to write a script to extract data from CVs, I wanted to use data to pre-select people. I work at Walmart, like a big company, and we receive thousands of CVs. I don't want to go through all of them. There's things that I know I'm looking for, so I don't want anyone who's over 65, for instance. I don't know anyone who doesn't have more than 5 years of experience in sales. So as an expert, I decide, script, tell me, out of these thousands of CVs, which ones comply with this rule that I came up with, because I know what I'm looking for. That's the big data paradigm. With artificial intelligence, like, what if we didn't have an expert? What if we just took all those CVs and asked the AI to identify the common patterns? So instead of taking the CVs of the people that are asking for a job, let's take the CVs of the people that we hired in the past, understanding these people represent the good decisions that you made in the past. So let's look at those patterns, and let's look which patterns are reproduced by the CVs of the people that now want the job. And so you don't have to make any decision. You don't have to decide, I want 5 years of experience in sales, because maybe that's not what makes someone successful. And so we'll just have an AI system be trained with lots of CV data of people that you have hired in the past, then run the new CVs under that data, and the system will tell us, these are the CVs where there's a better match between what you've hired in the past and what you're hiring now. This makes sense until you test it, until you audit it. And so we have found systems that were hiring people or prioritizing people because their name was Jared. Because in the past, you hired a lot of Jareds. As an HR person, that's never a rule that you would have in an expert system. But if you rely on the system to identify patterns, those patterns can be anything. And it doesn't have to be relevant necessarily. But AI developers don't want to hear that experts are important. And so they keep promising us, with more data, we'll identify more patterns, and then Jareds will become an outlier and will disappear, and we'll focus on the important things. We're seeing that is not the case. Those patterns can be incredibly random. I mentioned Jared. Another pattern that was identified in this specific audit was having played lacrosse in university. Lacrosse is a sport that only very posh men play, so it was a proxy for having gone to an Ivy League university, for instance. So it picks up on things that you would not have necessarily chosen as an expert. And that is the promise of AI. We don't need the expert anymore. The past data and the patterns in past data will tell us everything. That is never the case. Even with GPS, developers have incorporated rules because just understanding the past is not a good representation of what's happening right now or what will happen in the future. And so in GPS systems, you may have the historical route
that was most efficient, but maybe there's roadworks today. And so there's a rule inside those systems that says the historical data may show pattern A, but if there's a change in pattern A in the last 30 minutes or 20 or 60, that's a production decision, then can you prioritize what people are doing right now? Because we understand that in human mobility, what's happening right now may be more important than what happened in the past. So the historical efficient route is your baseline, but you understand that the complexity of today means that you need to incorporate rules into that system. So even the most simple rules, like GPS, incorporate those things. Netflix, the recommendations that you get on Netflix, the same logic, historical patterns. What have people watched after Mission Impossible? They've watched Mary Poppins. I'm going to suggest that you watch Mary Poppins because most people did that. But then understanding that cultural taste is not the same all over the world, and so engineers code that the historical data needs to only be computed for a specific country. So you would receive the preferences of people in Germany. But also we may add more rules. You may only receive the preferences of people in Germany in your age bracket, because older people and younger people may have different preferences. And so even in simple entertainment-based systems, developers have had to incorporate rules to make sure that they're actually useful. And so this idea of the disappearance of the expert doesn't really stand, even in the most simple system. So that promise of the disappearance of the expert is not holding. And yet, the promise of AI is based on the disappearance of humans, or the irrelevance of humans, because the data knows best. That is leading to lots of problems. I want to focus on three, picked up a bit randomly, but I think they're like a good kind of sketches of some of the things that we struggle with, that I feel need to become priorities in the work of anyone that cares about the future of our, I was going to say humanity, maybe not humanity, but at least democratic societies. First, we have a huge problem with bias. And I mentioned that already. If the job, the description of an AI system is something that takes historical data, identifies majority patterns, and reproduces majority patterns at the expense of minority patterns, that is the end of diversity. Outliers are women looking for a technical job. We're not common. We're not the majority. We're outliers. The system pushes us out. And that happens all the time. In banking, women receive 10 to 20 times less services than men just because we are underrepresented in training data, and the system captures that underrepresentation but reproduces it. So if an AI system, if you gave it diverse data on day 1, on day 10, it would only be majority patterns. Because you expand the prevalence of the efficient choice at the expense of the non-efficient choices. And again, the GPS is very useful here. It makes sense to eliminate a route that takes longer. It does not make sense to eliminate women from hiring processes. But unless there's an engineer that builds the rules and the conditions for those systems to identify those outliers and protect them, the logic of the system will always be to incorporate and reproduce and sometimes even create bias. And bias, of course, affects women. That's the most prevalent instance of bias that we find, which is really, really angering. Of course, people of color in facial recognition systems. But I think it's really important to remember that we can all be outliers at specific moments. You can be a white man and feel like these systems work for me. I'll always get the job. What if your symptoms leading to cancer are outlier symptoms? You will not be diagnosed in time. So anything that we do, we can be outliers. And so the dynamic of bias harms us all in ways that we don't even see and we cannot even complain about. So you'll never know that you could have been diagnosed 2 years earlier, because you'll never know there was an AI system that did not take into account the medical history of someone like you, just because your medical history is not the common history for that specific kind of cancer. And that happens for everything. So bias is a huge problem. And we are seeing a huge proliferation of what we call ADM systems, automated decision making systems, so not the LLMs. But the systems that are informing banks when they give out mortgages and loans, jobs when they give promotions, or when they hire someone, when they fire someone. We're seeing them in education, in university access, being decided by algorithms. When you claim unemployment at a public office in many countries, who decides whether you qualify is an AI system. So we are seeing the incorporation of all those systems in ways that can lead to a lot of harms, with people having no way to respond to that. Our first audit ever, I think it was like 7 or 8 years ago, was with women victims of domestic violence in Spain, whose risk is assigned by an algorithm. So you go to the police and you have a conversation with a policeman or woman. And after that conversation, the police officer translates that conversation into a series of points that feeds an algorithm, and the algorithm decides whether that woman receives any kind of protection. And women had no idea that this existed. And so when we tried to audit it internally, we contacted the Ministry of the Interior in Spain. We got responses, but we never got access to anything. So in the end, we did an adversarial audit, which is when a third-party audit, which when you don't have access to data, and you just reproduce the way that the system works. You can attack it. We published an adversarial auditing guide a few years ago. You can attack it, or you can just reproduce the data, and you can reverse engineer how that system works. But like, just to highlight that really important decisions are being made with those systems. Our latest audit, again adversarial together with communities, is on recidivism. So systems that determine whether inmates get access to prison privileges or freedom. We found the system to be random. Random. That's bad for everyone. That means that really good prisoners, whatever that means, the prisoners that should have access to privileges are not getting access to them, and that means the prisoners that should not leave prison are leaving prison. Like, this doesn't work for anyone. But everyone is convinced that AI is better than us. So bias for me is the biggest challenge and danger around AI. And it's also the basis of hallucination. So what we call hallucination is actually a consequence of this dynamic of bias, of this reproduction of majority patterns. What LLMs do is exactly the same thing. They're trained on massive amounts of human language. And I think, I don't want to not give them credit. I think that we are all surprised at how credible an LLM can sound, being trained only on the formal structure of sentences. I don't think any one of us expected that once we had enough data, enough computational power to ask a computer system to come up with content, the output would sound so credible. And that is amazing. Like, we all thought you need a combination of syntax and semantics in order to make sense. We've realized that actually syntax alone can be pretty convincing. But of course, not always. And we had some examples with the presentation before on how these systems can go haywire. And it's exactly because of the same thing. So the pattern is, most people, when discussing abortion, discussed how it should be forbidden. And so you ask something about abortion, the system will reproduce that idea. But also those systems, because they're trained purely on the structure of sentences, they do not distinguish between correlation and causation. So I did a test, for instance. I asked an LLM how old I am. There's enough information on the internet. I actually thought I was born in 1976, so I thought that the system would pick that up. It didn't. It said that I was 62. I'm not 62. Yet. No, I wouldn't mind being 62. 3 years away from retirement. I think it's actually a really sweet age. It's just not correct. If it had said 23, like that's the problem, is that it's not correct. It's not the amount, the figure. It may have assigned that age to me because my name is mentioned in a couple of articles on page 62. There's a correlation. My name and a number. Pattern. That's how these systems work. So unless there's a lot of information about my age online, the system has to come up with something. And the correlation can be just two coincidences, because not a lot of people look for me. There's not massive amounts of information of me online. And so I only have two things. That's enough to form a pattern. And so I feed you that information. That's what we call hallucination. It's the same dynamic of looking for patterns in text and reproducing those patterns. That's why sometimes they add content, just because other people in the past added content to what you're talking about. And so it understands that is the normal thing to do. That's the efficient way to respond to your query. So I think we need to start thinking and being critical about the business model of these systems. I do not think OpenAI will be here for a long time. I do not think that after the investor money runs out, they'll be able to convince any of us or the hospitals or the governments that are the real clients that a system that is not reliable, that they should invest in it. Would you buy a car that goes off the road 20% of the times? You wouldn't. The things that we use is because we're convinced that they are safe. If they're only safe 80% of the times, in things as critical as medical diagnosis or driving a car, I don't think we're going to be able or willing to spend money on systems that are profoundly unreliable. And so I think that what's going to happen in the near future is we're going to start realizing the value of experts and going more for a scenario of contribution of data into human decision making, but not substitution. And so we will not find the savings that the industry is claiming around those systems. So I think that we need. I don't think that the future is OpenAI. I don't think that the future is LLMs, and I think that we need to be better than that and be able to imagine alternative futures. And the third example, the third kind of image that I wanted to share with you, is what happens when AI is used in artistic creation. Because again, the logic is always the same. Data from the past, identify patterns, come up with something that reproduces the majority patterns. So today you go to any Gen AI solution and you ask it to produce something and it will produce something. You ask it to come up with the next painting from Jason Pollock and it will come up with something that looks like Jason Pollock. Like maybe he could have painted that. Again, let's problematize that a little bit. You know Picasso, I'm guessing? Do you know the Guernica from Picasso? A huge painting that depicts the consequences of German and Italian fascists bombing a city in my country, in Spain, in Guernica, and killing hundreds of people in the Second World War. It's one of his major works of art. It's being exhibited in Madrid. It's toured the world. It's a painting that represents the awfulness of war. And it's a really moving piece. If we had had LLMs and generative AI in 1937, when Picasso painted the Guernica, 2 weeks before Guernica was bombed, and we had asked a generative AI system, or we can do it now, take the work of Pablo Picasso between 1902 and 1937, March of 1937, and tell me, what will Picasso paint next? Would have given you a combination of patterns, colors and lines that resemble Picasso. So just like Pollock, yeah, he could have painted that. Next month, he painted the Guernica. Because the Nazis bombed Guernica. Because creation is the consequence of experience. Because we create art as a way to communicate how we experience the world. In AI, there's no experience of the world that is not a processing of patterns of the world experienced in the past in its formal form. That is not creation. And as a person who was saved by literature in my teenage years, my mom was 14 when she had me. I didn't have an easy upbringing. I was incredibly problematic in high school. Books gave me a window to the world. I read books and I continue to read books because they offer me the experience of other people. Text without experience doesn't mean the same. And I'm not saying that AI cannot produce things that move us. What I'm saying is that it's a different thing. And that the impact on our bodies, our souls, our way of understanding the world is completely different if there's a human experience and the ability to be changed by history and by experience than what AI offers us. We are not rational beings. We are not optimization machines. And if you want proof of that, think about your personal relationships. build a data line in the partners that you have chosen over time. Is your history of partners chosen a path towards efficiency? Are you always trying to improve? Is every new partner a bit better than the past? That's not how we measure things, because we change. We want different things. They're not a bit better than the past because we're looking for something else, because life and experience changes us. So what is art without experience? I think it's something else. And I'm not saying it cannot be compelling, and I'm not saying that I cannot be wowed by a Pollock that doesn't exist. What I'm saying is that art is something else, and that one doesn't take the space of the other. So I want to finish this by just positioning a few things that I think are key in how we think about the relationship between society and technology that I don't think that we talk about enough. One thing that was raised here, and I was very happy to hear, was the issue of power. One of the reasons why I think we were naive 25 years ago, when faced with the internet and the initial modern technologies, we kind of hoped that with these new technologies we'd be able to change relationships of power. And we never thought, what if we don't change those relationships of power? What if the relationships of power stay the same? And so the current powers that be are the ones that control those technologies. That didn't even cross our minds. We're just thinking of a better future. And there's a great image by E.P. Thompson, a UK historian of the British labor, working class in the 19th century, that explains how in the 19th century watches were beginning to be, clocks, not watches, clocks were beginning to be a new technology, were beginning to be generalized, but not generalized enough that everyone could have their own watch, but factories could have a clock. Clocks could be a great solution to overtime. If you know that it's 5, you know it's time to go home. In the past, workers didn't know that the day their work had ended. They had to make decisions based on the position of the sun. So having a clock could be a solution to overtime. It's a technology that can promote labor rights. E.P. Thompson explains how when they began to install these huge clocks in factories, before the day would end, bosses or managers would go and kind of move the needles so that it looked like you still had to work a little bit more. So in the end, it's not about the intrinsic capabilities of the technology, but about who has access to that technology. And I think that that's not part enough of our conversations. And we tend to see technologies just as, in their potential form and not in the ecosystem of power relationships that they're ingrained in. I also think that we need to address the financial structure of incentives around those systems, and I mentioned that already. One of the big problems that we have right now is that technology developers are not rewarded for building good products or safe products. They're rewarded for selling vaporware. They're selling to investors who need to see a possibility of changing the world and making a lot of money, or to advertisers. And so we are just, the system that we use is just the excuse for those systems to give us advertising. So social media, our email accounts, they're just the hook to show us ads. So it's not about how good those systems are or how happy we are with those systems. It's about how much those systems channel the possibility of charging advertisers. And I think that's screwing up everything, because it means we have no voice. So when we say this is not safe, no one cares, because we're not the ones that determine how much money these companies make at the end of the month. I also think that we need to start thinking what it means to focus on current harms of technology and not think about the potential future harms of when the robot comes or when AI develops consciousness. There are harms today. We are working with Roma communities in Slovenia because the Slovene state has incorporated AI in access to public benefits. And they feel that they're being left out since the introduction of AI. There's people today that are losing their homes. They're losing their access to benefits. People today that are not accessing jobs because of these malfunctioning systems. And they're usually the women and the poor and the vulnerable. This needs to stop. And we need to be able to focus on that. And talk all you want of the potential future of human consciousness. That's fine. But that cannot take space from making sure that people today are protected. That cannot take space from us saying the future of the relationship between technology and society is not substitution, it's contribution. It's not even collaboration, because that would make us equal. It's contribution. How can technology help us be better at what we do? That is it. That's all it will ever achieve. And the final thing, the way, and I'm going to close with this, the way that technology has managed to establish itself in our social and legal contexts is profoundly undemocratic. There's no other market area under democracies where producers can get away with not investing in safety. Every single chair you're sitting on has had to prove that it can hold the weight of a human person. And the worst that can happen is that you fall to the floor. It's not going to change your life. They've had to prove that the materials are robust enough. Otherwise, you cannot sell in Europe. That's what democracies are about. Democracies are about protecting people. Before democracies, you could buy cocaine in pharmacies. Democracies are the system that allows us, when we identify harms, we build mechanisms to make sure that people are protected. We're doing that in everything. COVID vaccines with pharmaceutical companies, not the nicest players in the world. No pharmaceutical company would ever question the need for a vaccine to go through a clinical trial. They understand that a safe vaccine is a better vaccine. If you build today a children's cart, you need to go through regulation. You build a toy, there's standards you need to follow. You build a house, there's standards you need to follow. For everything except AI. That creates a hugely unfair economic and market advantage for these players, because everybody else has to play by the rules, but it also breaks something very fundamental in our democracies, which is the ability to protect people. And I think that is very concerning that democracies all over the world have resigned their power to regulate those systems and to establish what safe means, what safety means, and what safety measures need to be incorporated into those systems to ensure that people are protected. So I think that in this conversation, there's a lot more at stake than the possibility of artificial consciousness. I think that's a nice thing to play with, but while we play with that, our democracies are being stolen from before our very eyes. And that I'm concerned about. That is not the world that I want to live in, and I work to make sure that we have the tools so that those safety mechanisms are incorporated in AI. Because I do believe that AI can do good things, and I believe in data. I love data. I love data more than words. But I love it when it works well. I love it when it's not lying about its capabilities. I love it when it's a way to make the world a better, more protective place. It is the job of all of us to make sure that that happens and that we stop going down the road of technology leading us to a space where democracy is not something that we have the luxury to discuss. I'll leave it here. Thank you.
Well, Gemma, thank you very much for this exposition of the meaning of better AI. I think that was what it was. Now that we have gotten a good idea of the dangers that you see and the possible routes to go, like I think you finished kind of with the expectation that we should make AI safe for democracy. Now let's try to maybe articulate some of the points you made a bit further and get into a discussion. We have 40 minutes of discussion, and I think we'll enter a conversation for a few minutes, and then I'll open the floor for the public. So, if you allow, I would try to just to open our conversation by trying to identify a common root of the shortcomings or problems of AI technology, a common root that I saw when you outlined the big problem of bias. I mean, you had a tremendous lot to say about bias in all its forms. And then the next problem that you outlined, I'd summarize as insufficient reliability. And the third problem area that I understood, which you exemplified by by Picasso's creative act, painting Guernica, that innovation or real intelligence always requires an experience of the world which AI systems don't have, since they are artificial and not really intelligent. So the common root in these problems, I think, is the notion of a pattern, because, I mean, as you described it, I mean, the patterns that are at work in all these three problem areas are always compositions that extend the past into the future. So they are retrospective and they continue into the future what has worked in the past. So I think that's the basic problem with the kind of pattern that you explained in all these three problem areas. So as a philosopher, I'm really astonished, I find it intriguing to think more about the concept of pattern detection, pattern extension, pattern generalization, the very idea of a pattern, because that's basically what underlies all the machine learning technology, which is at the moment basically what we mean by AI. I agree. So what could you perhaps say a bit more about, I mean, are you also intrigued by this notion of a pattern?
Very much so. And I'm working on a book, and the title is The Outlier. Because I feel very much an outlier. Like, again, I didn't grow up in traditional circumstances. And I think that we're all outliers in some of the things that we do. Like, we're all special in some area of our lives. And to think that those systems that tell us that they can classify us without understanding that we have these areas of specialty or being different is a huge limitation of these systems. And I would say everything that you mentioned, that I mentioned, like bias, and lived experience and all of that, they're not really problems of AI. They only become problems of AI when we keep denying that these are limitations of AI. Like, if we saw AI because of the possibilities that it brings, like, the identification of patterns in historical data, that's massive. Like, to be able to look at thousands of X-ray images of lungs and to identify patterns, that's great. But when we say, oh, that's going to be better than you're a doctor, then that becomes a problem. So in a way, we're not making the most of the real properties of AI, because we keep insisting on the things that they do worse instead of focusing on the things that they do better. But also there's the kind of this idea of personalization. Like, AI opens, like, so I chat to ChatGPT and I get a personalized something. And I think that's one of the biggest lies around AI because of the issue of patterns. I remember, I think I was here 9 years ago. I was being reminded of that. And I gave one of my favorite talks ever on data buddies. And one of the examples that I used back then is that, and that was 9 years ago, and I had been working on this in this space for a long time. When people were asking me what profiling meant, back then we spoke a lot about profiling in big data. And one of the things that I try to do is, how can I make analogies so that people understand technical terms in ways that are close to them? And I went online, I think it was like 2009 or something. And back then we were beginning to have dating apps. And there was an ad for Mythic on television that said, if you go to Mythic, it asks you all these questions and it gives you a profile. It assigns you a profile. Like, it understands who you are and then gives you a personalized profile. And I was like, that's interesting, because I'm very sure that Mythic does not personalize. Mythic comes up with patterns. And so I went online and I did all the questions about my love life and preferences and all of that. And then I was shown 16 categories of women. That was personalization. All of a sudden, I was 1/16 of the human population. I'm like, there's no way my very special needs and desires and lived experience is the same as 1/6 of the female population of the world. And that's just a huge lie. Like, it is never profitable to personalize. Like, a solution for each one of us will never make money. The money is in making one thing that caters to a lot of people while making them feel really exclusive. So AI is all about this. It is about the creation of patterns and making sure that we feel individualized enough, but then at the same time we are the same enough so that we consume similar things and that there's profit behind those dynamics. But I think that the idea of the pattern has so much potential for us to understand how these systems relate to us, and also to start to subvert that. When you realize that you're a pattern for all those systems, how can you add noise to that pattern? How can you be an outlier? How can you play a little bit with your data double and with the information that they have on you?
Well, I think this is a telling example that you just related, that there's a taxonomy of, say, 16 types, and that's sold to you as individualization or personalization. I agree that in terms of the profit motive, what counts is not whether personalization really happens, but whether you think that personalization is happening. Because you like personalization, don't you? Yeah, would be nice. I mean, we're suffering from anonymous structures and non-recognition, so personalization is a big promise. And I think it's one of the hopes that in your talk you explained that this whole business of AI taps into our hopes. One part of these hopes is being acknowledged as a person or as an individual by technology, by technological means. So maybe this is partly fake. I'm not so sure whether personalization is such a fake in what is called personalized medicine, when you have genomic analysis that feeds into the kind of treatment that is tailored to you. There's a certain sense of personalization that is, I think, non-fake, but in the example you mentioned, it's completely fake.
It's always patterns, and again, like we can build systems that see minority patterns. There's always some minority patterns are going to need to be pushed out, and the key in our work is to identify when those outliers are relevant or just noise, like when it's just the route that you shouldn't take because it just takes longer, it's not efficient, or when it's actually a good alternative. The same with medical issues. And so these systems always perform worse on someone who doesn't have the typical symptoms. And so we can have personalization in the sense that one of those systems can take into account more variables at once than a human being, but also human being can be creative with the variables that they have in ways that AI can't be creative. So, like, for instance, we were asked to audit a system being developed in Africa to count parasites in biological in poop. I'm just gonna, there's a word for it, but I can't come up with it now. Because it's there's lots of diseases that are transmitted through parasites, and one of the keys is counting how many parasites are in the samples. And so this was a company developing lenses for mobile phones, so that someone with a mobile phone would not need a microscope, and then the mobile phone would give it the AI to automatically count how many parasites were in the biological sample. And we helped them with an audit, and actually the system worked well. It was pretty easy. You just have to count. There's no much room for error. But one of the things that we realized is, well, yes, this works better than a human and faster than a human, but it only sees parasites and it only counts parasites. A human could see other things. So you get a biological sample, you're like, oh, it's parasites, but there's also this other thing. But the AI will never look at that because it's not trained
to look at that. So again, we gain things in terms of that we have a system that can take into account more variables that mean that maybe we can find out better what's happening with you. But that alone, if we don't make that a contribution to the human that can then add the build knowledge and also the feeling of talking to you or touching you, like all the things that AI cannot do, I think that we're just losing things. But again, the potential is in the contribution of data systems into our existing professions or what we do, and not this idea of substitution. And by imposing or insisting on substitution, we are again getting rid of the best of AI, which is I'm a really good doctor and I could really benefit from having an AI counting those parasites, but I want to make sure that I also look at them, and I'm going to spend less time because I don't have to count the parasites now, but I still need to look at them because there's things that the AI may have missed, but someone needs to tell us that. Otherwise, doctors are just like, oh, there's this AI system, so I don't have to look at these biological samples anymore, and that's not the case.
So this is an illustration of what you call the relation of contribution instead of substituting, yeah, or collaborating even. All right. I mean, thinking a bit more about the hopes which fuel the tremendous success of AI technology. Maybe we have here a different sense of data poetics, because after all, I mean, hopes and the imaginary and fantasies, I would say this is all a poetic dimension of this technology, albeit a poetic dimension that is being exploited by corporate motives. Yeah, but so maybe it's the poetry of a tremendous technology corrupted by capitalism. But nonetheless, it's a huge imaginary, in the collective imaginary, yeah, from science fiction to hopes of personalization, there's always a tremendously important imaginary component in the success that enables this technology, and this I find really astonishing.
We've all grown with the idea of progress, that, you know, our life is meant to experience progress, and progress very much linked to technological progress. And so it's, in a way, it's like we are moving forward at a time when with other things in our lives, and especially politics, a lot of people feel that we are moving backwards. So I think it's like it's one space of hope that can now be exploited. And I think that I mean, these companies are really good at manipulation, and not manipulation, at marketing, which is another word for manipulation. They're just very good at playing with those kind of things that we like, and it's a combination of these fascination by and with technology, fascination with money. A lot of people like money, and like all of a sudden we had Mark Zuckerberg before, and now we have Sam Altman. Like the possibility that maybe we can become rich, like maybe we can be like them, maybe we can be the first employee of one of these companies and become millionaires. So I think they're also playing on a fascination with money, and they're also playing on something that I find really funny, which is our tendency to humanize everything, to anthropomorphize everything. Like I have 2 cats, and I'm very aware they're mammals. They're just instinct machines. Their brain is this size, and yet I love them in ways that go beyond something that is rational. I don't know if we had this here, but in Spain there was a phase maybe 10 years ago when we all played with Tamagotchis. These things that you would buy, like, you know, we would feed this really silly screen. It's like, we love that. We love to see humanity in things that are not human. And I think they're also playing on that, like, you know, oh my God, maybe this has feelings, and then I can have that relationship. And I think it's a combination of these 3 things, the fascination with technology, with money, and with non-human human things, that means that we kind of our critical instincts don't get activated when we are faced with AI.
Because it's so fascinating. I think, I mean, speaking of the imaginary component, I think we also have to say, we also have to address another fascination that I think is important in explaining the overwhelming success of AI technology, and that is that is our obsession with instrumental rationality, that is with problem solving and the efficiency of problem solving. And one of my favorite authors, Evgeny Morozov, has coined a very interesting term, namely solutionism. Yeah, so it's inventing problems to which I then sell you a solution. And I think solutionism is also a part of the driving forces of AI success, don't you think?
I think it's the idea of something being easy. I think I mentioned that at the beginning, like, AI will solve things. We don't know what, but we like that things get solved. So we don't understand how it's going to happen, but we're like, yeah, bring it on. If it's going to make things better, then, I'm not going to ask many questions about what better means. And that's hugely problematic, is that, again, our critical instincts are limited. And so we just basically buy everything that these companies sell. There's also a fascination with the idea of the homo economicus, like this idea that we're all rational beings that act on a rational calculation of odds, which is, the homo economicus has been kind of proven wrong for decades now. But I think that there's kind of, this idea that what if things were easy? What if our feelings could be quantified and organized? And I read something at one point that made me think, like, there's also this very Silicon Valley attitude, like lots of young men, single young men with difficulties to establish healthy relationships with other people, and especially with women, kind of hoping that the world works according to patterns and rules, where it's not about feelings, it's about, that's what I need to do next. So it's like also a fascination with that. And I was in Washington last week. And there was one of the founders of Google, the only one that still has values. And he was mentioning also something very interesting about the impact of these, and that goes beyond, like, I don't know anything about this, like the psychological impacts of those systems on people and social media and all of that. But the image that he suggested, I thought it really made me think. He said, you look at people like Elon Musk or Trump, and he mentioned somebody else, like someone very, very famous, and it was like, no, not like some different, like, so a politician, whom? No, it was not a technological person. I can't remember. But the idea is these people, so another one, it was not a politician, it's not a technology person. These people started by being very different people. And then they all entered the space of social media and these kind of having these spaces where everyone heard them, but also attacked them, having influence and having their egos catered to. And their personalities have kind of converged. Like now, they're pretty much the same person, which makes you think, when you are exposed to that level of exposure, how does your self change? And who do you become? Because maybe you become Trumps and these kind of people. And I just thought it was very suggestive, because I think there is a pattern. You look at influencers. They're kind of converging into a personality. And the only common point is that exposure to exposure.
So once again, thanks for this grand picture of mostly problems, but some solutions at least. And thanks, Ode, for organizing and all others who have been partaking in making this happen today. I can now only say thank you for the discussions and for all contributions. And some of us will continue the discussion in Dortmund now. And for those who have to go, thanks for having been here, and farewell.
I would like to thank